whereas the US heavily legislates and it's much more capitalist than we are, and certain regimes in the Asian markets don't really give a shit about the things whatsoever. So I think
fair enough. And there's
yeah, fair enough.
I mean, no, as a generalisation, I can't pick holes in it.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive generalisation.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Ian's done a runner again, so once more, off the bench comes Super Sub Ray.
Yeah, he's in France this week.
Is he?
Yeah.
Go on, son. And before I get into it, if you're watching us on YouTube or on the site or on Facebook, you can listen to us on SoundCloud or iTunes or countless other services, because we're just so popular now, and vice versa. Right, this week, what we're going to chat about. Ray, you seem keen on chatting about AI, specifically in telecoms, so
Yes.
I think we might open up on that and maybe go off on some other AI tangents. Pierre, get your Terminator noise ready for the edit. And then we're going to talk a bit about regulation. There's been some stuff going on to do with regulators, which hopefully won't be as dull as that sounds. And lastly, we're going to talk about spectrum auctions, which also are far more exciting than they sound. But this is a telecoms podcast, so if you've got a problem with it, then what are you doing listening in the first place? So just back off. Right.
No, stay.
No, stay. I was only joking. Where was I? All right, so Ray, you kick it off.
Yes.
There's a lot of artificial intelligence in telecoms these days, isn't it?
Well, a lot of talk about it. Activity as well. But this week in particular, so Ian is not here because he's in Paris. He's at a conference where AI is one of the main topics. But before I get to that, there was also a move this week, pretty interesting, for Qualcomm, which has been developing AI algorithms for its chips into devices for quite some time. But it's now going down the path of challenging Intel and NVIDIA in terms of AI components for data center infrastructure, which is pretty interesting. And I guess, it's kind of, not so much FOMO, but I guess it needs to, it has the AI capabilities. Obviously, this is a big market. It kind of makes sense for it to try and go down that route, but it's got some pretty serious catching up to do. But big company, a lot of pedigree. So I'm sure it'll make an impact.
I covered that as well. It seems to be particularly strong in what it calls inference AI, which I think is more or less as it's described, i.e. some of the sort of clever bits of AI where you can infer something from something else. And one of the reasons it's good at inference is what you were just describing. It's already been in millions, possibly billions of devices. So, and it's been doing things like doing translations and doing clever bits of sort of calculation on these devices, and it's built up this database or this core knowledge which it can draw upon to make these inferences. So that's, judging by its press release anyway, one of the areas in which it thinks it's got an advantage over, as you say, the likes of Intel and NVIDIA. Yeah.
So there was that earlier in the week, and then Ian's reporting from Paris has been pretty interesting in terms of the some of the more pragmatic views of the potential use of AI in telecoms. So there's been speakers. So Colt, which is European telco, but likes to push the boundaries, likes to be testing things out pretty early doors. And I guess it's more than a year and a half ago they announced an internal program they called Sentio to look at the potential for artificial intelligence in some very pragmatic areas like fault management and network planning, etc., etc. Nothing too science fiction.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, and so they've been doing some trials and tests, etc. And essentially what they found is that the likelihood of networks running themselves completely, like the zero touch, the human free network operations, is so far away.
Oh, that makes you feel better.
Yes, I think it makes, and I think Ian's take on it was this is this is going to make the operations people at Colt feel a lot better that they're not about to be replaced by a robot. But I think I think we are settling in telecoms into identifying where AI can be put to good use. But I also think that there's also some precedent being set here by the likes of BT, which has been using machine learning to great effect in its global security operations, where it has some very sophisticated machine learning tools from some with the help of some specialist vendors. But it never relies totally on those robots, on those tools. It uses that information to feed into a human operator who can interpret what the machine learning tools are, the information that's coming up with, and that human operative then decides on the action to be taken. And I think that's really the
juncture, isn't it?
That is the model I think that we'll see. So I think there's a lot of efficiency to be had from AI, and I also think it's worth looking, always striving to go, how far can we take this? How close can we get to zero touch? And that's all you got to aim far away to try and get there. But I think having wide area multi-service communication networks that are running themselves, I think, is such a long way off that nobody listening to this podcast should need worry about it.
No, and we'll certainly be long gone.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Well,
and next year
it's
for
all
me.
about the data, though, isn't it? I mean, you can't. Yeah, I got told off before we actually started about where my mic is. But it's to say, but that's applicable to every aspect of artificial intelligence, isn't it? I mean, you've got data on the faults, but you haven't got the data for the machine learning to learn about the results and the possible consequence and the decision made and whether that was a good or bad decision. That'll eventually come with time. But it's the same as, to liken it with, there was that incident in Christchurch, and Facebook Live showed it, and a load of people said, well, why didn't your artificial intelligence pick up on the fact that this is really bad content and shut it down? And Facebook just turned around, and this is a perfectly reasonable response from Facebook, is, well, to identify horrific material, the AI needs horrific material to understand what it actually is.
Bizarre chicken and egg thing.
And there's just not enough of that horrific material to teach the AI, and that's possibly when it comes down to network fault management and network planning. There's the incidents there, but there isn't enough of the outcomes and then longer term down the line to understand whether it's good or bad decision. So as soon as you get more of those decisions, and then you understand 2 years down the line whether they were good or bad decisions, that's when you can train and become more and more automated further through the process.
I think there's also areas where you could take the AI tools that bit further and give them the chance to prove themselves in real life situations where if stuff goes wrong, there isn't really much comeback. So, and this is why I think AI enabled chatbots, for example, there's been a lot of work on that, and of course by enabling them to actually interact with customers, there's been a lot of that learning, so a lot of progress. But if a chatbot doesn't know what to do, or perhaps gives a confusing answer, then that's not the end of the world. That customer is unlikely to go, I've had enough of this, and then a human can step in. But if you make a mistake in the network, then the potential is shutting it down and impacting, tens of millions of people potentially, and not just annoying somebody for 5 seconds.
It's the benefit trade-off, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In the customer service example, because I was out with Vodafone months and months back, and they said they trained their AI to something like 42 different queries or 64 different queries or something like that. So when the AI recognizes that it's something to do with erroneous charges on a bill, because there's so many different aspects towards erroneous charges, the AI hasn't been trained on that, so it immediately hands over to a human operative. So it's identifying those cases, and the same thing can be done for the network. You just incrementally add and add and add use cases and sort of different features, and eventually automation will take over.
Yeah. Going to give a shout out here as well to Telefonica as well, because they've been doing a lot of work in this area, not only on the customer facing side where they've been doing cloud-based AI-enabled customer service, which they talked about at Mobile World Congress this year, and they've been doing a lot with Microsoft Azure there, but they've been spending a lot of time looking at it sort of behind the scenes as well. I think, Telefonica is an example of another operator that's already put a lot of time and effort into this, as have a bunch of others. But
that's it, because I was at that press conference as well. I thought I took a lot away from that, and I thought what they were doing in terms of like the virtual assistants and creating that sort of smart ecosystem behind their virtual assistants, really, really good, bold move. And
now they're going to move it into the smart home.
Yes.
So they're ahead of the game of
100%.
Others, and you can't. There is no way to catch up.
It's a great opportunity. I mean, you're talking about we were talking ages and ages ago about the battle for the living room, and because the telcos already have hardware in the living room, you could build the ecosystem around that gateway, and the smart speakers wrestled it away from the router and now control the ecosystem. I mean, this is a great idea of diversifying revenues. They collect all the users and all the third parties going through the same gateway and monetize. They don't monetize the user; they monetize the services which the user is buying in the smart ecosystem that's been built around the virtual assistant. I think it's a wonderful way to leverage.
I think the telcos have an opportunity to get back in and wrest back some of the control by promising not to listen in and to respect the privacy of customers, because I think people are starting to get freaked out by the fact that if they have a voice activated assistant in their home and they talk a lot about trainers or ASOS or such and such, and all of a sudden adverts are appearing in their Instagram feed and they're freaking out.
I think the telcos are in a fantastic opportunity because they developed that trust relationship with the consumer already, or the customer already. They've had the billing details of these customers for decades, and also they've been enabling conversations and texts for decades. And do you presume that your telco is listening in on your call or reading your SMSs as they cross the network?
No, it's the government.
That presumption, but that presumption of trust and innocence is already there with the telco. So it's a great position to leverage.
Yeah.
Back to what we're talking about, sort of machine learning and schooling the AI, and that goes all the way back to that Qualcomm thing with the inference. Do we think, in the case of these sort of smart speakers, that the underlying strategy is that they are building up this repository of machine learning sort of prior knowledge by listening on all our chats and all that sort of thing?
Well, and also I think it's not only machine. In fact, did I read just today that Amazon has 7,000 humans listening in to when commands are, when it's Alexa, tell me this, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's not only a robotic process, but they have humans on this as well, I guess.
Yeah.
And this comes down to the understanding of what is being said, rather than just
the humans there to sort of fine tune it.
Basic syntax.
So this is one of the things that a lot of people don't really understand about artificial intelligence, and it's a massive bugbear of mine that people say AI and machine learning, whereas AI is the umbrella term, and machine learning is a single technology in that umbrella of AI. And one of the other huge, really, really challenging areas underneath the umbrella is context and general knowledge, because to make a lot of these decisions, the applications need the power of context and general knowledge. But you think, how would you actually put that incredible library of context and experience that we've got in our head and we take for granted,
that we've learned over our entire lives?
A lot less years.
If that person's
for
British,
me
they're
than
being
you guys.
sarcastic.
Yeah.
Quite good, really.
Yeah.
But how do you translate that?
They don't
into
really
computer
think it's
language?
a nice day.
Yeah.
Nice day, huh?
How do you translate that into a computer library that it can lean
concepts,
on? So this is where I think this is that the similar sort of thing you were talking about with the Amazon.
I think so. I
placing
saw,
it into context.
I saw a headline. I hope I haven't misrepresented it.
But I think it's a massive area, and
absolutely.
A lot of the AI functions can't exist without context.
Yeah.
One thing that occurs to me strategically about that, if Qualcomm thinks it can take on some very well-established incumbents in the cloud space, because, at least in part, because of this track record, this build-up of contextual knowledge it has for this inference AI that it talks about, then is this a new arms race whereby companies like Qualcomm and then obviously Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc., basically make themselves create a really high barrier to entry to AI, because you can't do AI up to their standard unless you've got all this incredible
this is what I said,
background stuff.
This is what I meant before. You can't, unless you buy one of these companies and you buy their knowledge, you can't catch up. And actually, that's applicable to a lot of areas. I think it's. You can't fast forward this stuff.
I mean, this is where Amazon, Qualcomm, the all of these companies will make money in the future, because you can sell this knowledge to, you can sell access to the library to application developers and the people that are creating the front end AI services. They're the real, the clever programmers that come out of like MIT. They don't have this hardcore data science background. They're the guys that are building the front end applications. They'll need access to these libraries, and that's a massive monetization opportunity.
Well, but actually, that's a good point. I mean, this is a slight sort of segue into the next topic, but that doesn't mean we're abandoning the previous one. But I think when these companies are in possession of such an important resource as you just described, I think governments and regulators are going to poke their nose in pretty hard. If they suddenly go, there's no way you can build a viable AI system for whatever use on the back of our prior knowledge without us charging you absolute tons of money. It might be a bit like FRAND patents in mobile standards, where they say, look, this is so essential to everyone that we're going to regulate how much you can charge for this. Yes, you can still charge, but you can't hold everyone over a barrel, because you're basically a monopolist when it comes to, or an oligopolist when it comes to this sort of entry point to AI. So I think they find themselves regulated quite hard on that.
This is where the culture, I think, will be slightly different there, because Qualcomm have a way of, or if you look at their patents, of wrestling more money out of potential customers.
Ask Apple.
Yeah. Whereas if you look at the basic principle of Amazon and Google is scale. You look at the reason Google is making so much money is because it works with so many different organizations, and it's streamlining that process that you can actually collect £5, and that's £4.50 profit from not Papa John's, but I don't know, Tennessee Fried Chicken down the road. A tiny company.
Tell you don't live in a very affluent area.
I don't even
you don't even get Kentucky.
It's very specific.
Yeah, but then as opposed to the nationwide brands at the top end of the scale.
Yes.
GFC.
But the idea of Google is built on scale and accessibility to everyone and making money across the board through scale, which I think and then you got two repositories and you've got two different cultures of how to make money.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the culture side of it is fascinating. So another thing, was it you that wrote about Europe trying to sort of set up some kind of standard for AI ethics?
Yeah.
That he said with a heavy heart.
That was a weary.
Yes. Right, way to take the wind out of my segue.
It was 7 principles.
Yeah. But I'll ask you, however painful it is to you, to elaborate in a bit. But ethics in AI is an interesting thing because, of course, if we've got machines making decisions effectively on behalf of human beings, there has to be an ethical element to it.
Yeah.
And so Europe's had a go. You don't seem too blown away by it.
Well, that's. I mean, it's just one of those things that it's not regulation, it's not legislation, it's not anything really for the moment. It's just guidelines which will probably give a bit of a direction of where future national legislation will head in the future. But it's all very, it's all just very fluffy. There's nothing particularly.
But wouldn't it be nice if we didn't screw this up?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, the principles themselves. I should have got them up because I knew we were going to talk about it, so I should have actually got them up beforehand.
Get people to go and read them on the site.
Yeah, go on the site. The principles themselves aren't particularly that exciting, but
hence the sign.
Yeah. It's just they're just quite generic, and very top line to build foundations for future. I mean, don't get me wrong, you've got to start somewhere, and Europe has taken the furthest, the most steps forward. So it kind of looks like Europe are going to take much more of a prominent stance on the world than anyone else. Mainly because I think we're a bit more fluffy, we're a bit more soft and cuddly around the edges. We care about people's opinions more and privacy over here and that sort of thing. Whereas the US heavily legislates and it's much more capitalist than we are, and certain regimes in the Asian markets don't really give a shit about the things whatsoever. So I think
fair enough. And there's
fair enough.
I mean, no, as a generalisation, I can't pick holes in it.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive generalisation.
Odious though I find the organisation, the European Commission and the Union, has some distinct uses when it comes to things like this, because they do speak with a common voice on behalf of hundreds of millions of people. When they do implement some kind of initiative or viewpoint or piece of legislation, they will follow through on it. They've been pretty good at sort of monopoly busting the tech giants and that sort of thing. And I've got to say, most of the time when they've done them, I haven't found it to be a gratuitous bit of victimisation. They've normally had a point.
Yeah.
So I'll give credit where it's due.
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with the idea that it has to be regulated and legislated. It has to be regulated. They have to be.
If you just let the free market go crazy with AI, or God knows.
You let the free market go crazy with
anything.
Then it's
Skynet time, isn't it?
I think the warnings have been out there for a few years, and the concerns are around the weapons industry, isn't it?
Yes. Well, definitely. And Google occasionally.
Not a lot of ethics there.
It's not known. It's known for sort of putting ethics as a top priority. But yeah, I mean, going full circle back to the telecoms thing, do you think, we agree that AI in networks is, at least for the time being, an efficiency play? It's just about reducing a bit of headcount in terms of what you need to make the plumbing work or whatever, but not full automation for a long time. Do you think that there needs to be ethical considerations in this quite sort of pragmatic use of AI, or is that very black and white?
I reckon the telcos, this will really this will really distinguish between future-proof telcos and the ones that are just literally trying to look at short-term profits to keep to keep investors happy. Because I think there's massive efficiency gains to be played, but it's the ones that use AI for value add, and that'll eat into a lot of their capital, at least in the first instance. But it's the ones that actually absorb that sort of that capital expenditure will be better in the long run. So I think there will be a two-tier telco, one which is purely utility, and the ones that are immediately focused on actually reducing expenditure, and then the ones that are really investing in some really smart products built around AI, like Telefonica, are the ones that will maintain that position as a communication service, or what do they call it, a digital services provider,
DSP,
as opposed to a communications utility.
Exactly, so do you think the case for the ROI for investment in AI for telcos is pretty clear cut?
I think so. And to come back to your ethics question, I think some ethics is probably required when the use of AI is for customer engagement, and much less so, if at all, when it's for internal process automation.
Because there's no ethical implication to optimizing one bit of the network over another or something like that.
I mean, I guess some people would argue that there is an ethical element because the use of these kind of tools could result in headcount reductions and putting people out.
That in itself is an ethical consideration.
But in terms of the specifics, I think that's a more general workforce, bigger picture thing.
And they get. I mean, you guys, I like reading. You've been strong on that whole sort of automation angle within telcos and operators. I get the impression they tend to get a bit twitchy whenever we bring it up in conversation.
Well, they don't want to talk about the potential impact on their workforces.
No, because it's never going to be a PR win for them, is it?
No.
It's always. I mean, they're just very edgy about redundancies, aren't they? You know, I mean, you bring it up with someone like Deutsche Telekom, and they're like, we don't make these massive swathing cuts like BT do. Do you remember that the 13,000 redundancy amounts last year? But if you actually have a look, they probably sacked as many people as BT, but it's death by 1,000 cuts, because like Ian's collects a lot of data on this, and you look over the last 5 or 6 years, and they are just as
accumulates.
Just as ruthless cutting the heads, dropping the head count.
They just do it on a more sort of subtle way.
Sneaky.
Like no one reported, for instance, that what was it? It's Telefonica. It's different bag, different telco. But no one reported that Telefonica was cutting 10% of its workforce in Germany.
Right.
The other day, they said that there's going to be something like, because I would have thought they'd have more people there, but apparently they've only got 1,000 or 1,500 people working there. Maybe this is someone, who's just quoting some bad statistics. I didn't cover it because it wasn't that many jobs. So, but it proves my point.
Like 100 or so.
I didn't cover it, so it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, well, that seems to be a sensible way. If you're the sort of evil mastermind at the top of a company, sort of twirling your moustache and stroking your cat, the clever way to create efficiencies would be on the sly. Yes, twirling your cat. Yes, that would seem to be the clever way of doing it. There's another way, and this is a bit of a segue, maybe a bit forced, but bear with me, where there might be an ethical consideration, and there's also been a regulatory angle this week, which is the topic of net neutrality, which they get a lot more excited about in the US than we do here. And they are just they're trying to push through some bill. So the what is it? The FCC, is it?
FCC.
Yeah. So they previously they basically opened it up so that operators. Sorry, I'll stop paraphrasing and hand over to you in a sec, Jamie. So that operators could they had a more laissez-faire approach, and now Democrats are trying to push back on a more restrictive approach. But that could be bull. You tell me. Tell me it like it is.
Yes. I mean, that's the story that the Democrats are putting out onto the world, that the Republicans are, favouring this Wild West internet where everyone, all the telcos have, basically no regulation. They can do whatever they want, and they screw blogs ultimately.
Yeah.
So basically what they've done, I'll start off with my position on the matter first.
Sure.
I think the Democrats are going too heavily regulation, and the Republicans, initially, by completely repealing Tom Wheeler's net neutrality rules, have gone too light touch.
Right.
So I think there has to be some middle ground, and at the moment, so 2017, June 2018, the Republicans passed what they called the Restoring Internet Freedom Order, which cut down all net neutrality rules.
Right.
However, what they have done since is they've introduced a bill called Preserving Internet Freedoms, or something like that.
Simplistic names for their bits of legislation, don't they?
Which has been working, which is currently getting blocked by the House of Representatives, where the Democrats have majority. But this bill, introduced by the Republicans, stops telcos blocking traffic and stops telcos degrading the performance of internet traffic, which is two of the big concerns which is protected by net neutrality. But it does allow telcos to run a premium service.
Yeah.
So you can pay to have your internet traffic sped up. So Democrats are blocking this, saying we want all three blocked, which is, from my perspective, too far to one direction. The telcos should be allowed the opportunity to make money. Now, the Democrats have introduced another bill which blocks all three, and that's passed through the House and is probably going to get is 99.9% likely to get blocked by the Senate.
Right, which is still Republican controls. And even if it does get through the Senate, the White House have promised a presidential veto. Now, Trump's probably tweeted something like, "You can kiss my ass."
Yeah, but for me, this is the worrying thing about telcos, about politics in the US. It's so partisan. For me, there's a real simple solution to this. The telcos should be allowed to offer a premium traffic service, but you put conditions on it. You say, okay, you can sell faster internet services, but the maximum speed you can sell is 25% faster than your standard service. That way, it offers the telcos an opportunity to monetize and offer premium services, but it removes the idea of giving below par services on the standard that it forces everyone onto the premium.
Seems very sensible to me, mate. You should be a regulator.
See, I should be I should be a regulator.
But is the concern about the speed of a broadband service, or whether a telco might prioritise its video service over other video services?
No. So the big concern is on the, say, like content provider side, where startups are going to have no opportunity to compete against the likes of Netflix, because Netflix can pay to have this premium service, which is 5 times faster than the mediocre or the standard service, whereas startups will never be able to meet that customer experience. Therefore, can no longer lodge a challenge to the likes of Netflix.
But Ray, you make a good point with AT&T buying Time Warner and all that.
Whether they prioritise it.
But they say, I think Jamie's broad rules still apply, whether you own it yourself or whether it's a third party. I think I agree. The gap between the premium and the bog standard should be regulated to a certain maximum.
Because as far as I'm concerned, you have to give these telcos the opportunity to make money off the billions they've made spent on networks. The OTTs
enable ROI, but also innovation at the same time.
Exactly.
Which is what regulators are supposed to do.
Exactly.
Just that they arse it up half the time.
Because
they're under a lot of pressure, remember.
They are under pressure.
That's true.
Because
we have the photos.
Because the balance isn't. It's not in a good position at the moment, and the OTTs are constantly biting at the telcos, saying we're going to steal more of your revenues, actually, and that's not sustainable, is it? So let's be honest.
And the other problem, and we kind of touched on this last week, is this stuff all becomes politicized. So obviously. In the States, there'll be a degree of Republicans are just going to oppose a Democrat idea and vice versa on principle.
I think
because
that's
they've got this adversarial system. And I suppose the more that politics and tech overlap, which they clearly do, again as we discussed last week, but we're seeing examples of all the time, not least European Commission with this ethics thing. We had what was it I wrote about? So Facebook's obviously in the crosshairs a hell of a lot, and they did something this week where basically they seem to placate the European Commission just by publishing some greater sort of clarification as to what your rights are as a user of Facebook, i.e. spelling out the bleeding obvious, which is we will get your data and we will sell it to the highest bidder. And for some reason that seemed to placate the European Commission in the short term, just to point out this stuff that surely everyone already knew.
Well, the thing is, I don't think they did. Because there was a survey earlier this week which suggested that 52% of adults don't understand how Facebook makes money.
Right.
They're just
fair point.
They're just there's an assumption that they make money
like the
somehow.
Senator. Remember the senator?
Yeah.
But they still add senator.
But this is the problem. We're in a very privileged position, and we take for granted the fact that we understand how Facebook makes money. Most people don't. So. does this make opt-in completely redundant because Facebook isn't spelling out in black and white how they make money, yet they're seeking consent to make money via this way that no one understands?
The opt-in's implicit as soon as you create an account.
Yeah.
And they're saying that's too wide-reaching. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Facebook...
Even if they spelt it out, the impact of willful ignorance is always going to overcome anything.
Ignorance is bliss.
Willful ignorance.
Willful.
Yes.
Okay, fair.
I don't want to know because I just want to watch that cat video.
Well, that's the thing. I think people they're just happy. They're happy under the assumption that Facebook makes money, but they don't want to know how Facebook makes money because I like the status quo of getting things for free.
You don't want to see how a hot dog is made.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be quite cool.
Yes, absolutely.
Talking about cat videos, that would be a cool thing. What if every time you watched a bit of content, for example, a cat video on Facebook, had a little caption underneath saying, be aware that by watching this cat video, we're going to make all sorts of assumptions about you, like you're going to want these sort of bizarre products, and not even necessarily cat products. They could be back to the AI thing and the algorithm. Our algorithm is going to assume that you're a very sort of lonely person that needs lots of meals for one or some whatever the inference they might make from you watching something. It'd be funny if the little caption was along the bottom. Yeah, it'd make you quite self-conscious every time you watched a bit of content, wouldn't it?
But the issue is, and this
we're
is
judging you.
Yes, quite.
This is something that not a lot of other people realise, that it's the telcos are doing exactly the same thing. If you ever everyone on their computer, Google AdSmart, Sky AdSmart, and you'd be amazed at how hyper-targeted Sky can make their advertising platform. So everyone thinks that it's just the OTTs, but there are a lot of people that are smart enough to actually
there's a
create
whole industry
these
called
hyperscale.
That they abbreviate to ad tech. I mean, basically, Facebook is just a media company.
Yeah,
it's just that the media, whereas we're a media company and the content that we create ourselves, they just appropriate third-party content. But the business model is exactly the same as a media company, and so of course they're going to use targeted ads. I mean,
monetizing an audience.
Yeah, monetizing an audience, exactly. I mean, don't forget what kicked all this off was everyone acting all surprised when it turned out that some political campaigners could target sort of marginal seats or certain demographics or something like that using all this clever ad tech. But as far as I'm concerned, I found a lot of that sort of Cambridge Analytica outcry a bit disingenuous because it was just an extension of the kind of targeted advertising that the internet has brought in for decades now. But as soon as you start accusing people of rigging elections and says talk about sort of Russians and all that sort of thing, it all gets a bit dark and sinister. But it's basically just using ad tech and algorithms and I suppose to some extent AI to target your ads.
Look at this. You can target through.
Well, that was the tool.
Through Sky AdSmart, you can target one of the areas that you can target is the age of the youngest baby in the households, which is 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, 18 to 24,
and
24 plus.
Lob nappy ads at them.
And then it goes on to age of kids in households. Yeah, there's loads.
And yet I find
it's
these
just as sophisticated. Oh, well, it's not as sophisticated.
Well, I was just going to talk about sophistication. For all that sophistication, half the time I get served ads for Amazon products that I've already bought. So they've still got a bit of work to do.
Lots of work to do.
Okay. Well,
this is part of what I was talking about the other day when I was saying that the battle for the living room, and I kind of think that Facebook is going to win it because Amazon made its billions by creating a marketplace and also a cloud computing platform. It's not necessarily the smartest business around. Don't get me wrong, the people who made it a lot bloody smarter than me. But
what it's really good at is like logistics and efficiencies and that sort of thing.
But Google is a business which is built on algorithms and smart assumptive software.
Buffonry.
Yeah, so the Google search engine, it succeeded because it put the right results in front of you where Facebook
and really quickly
well, not Facebook,
Alta Vista,
Bing, Alta Vista,
Yahoo
was
Yahoo's directory,
dumb search engine. And this is a company whose heritage is all software, algorithms and smart assumptions.
Yeah so they've got a head start there. Totally.
I think they've got the culture for it, but I mean, don't get me wrong, Amazon will catch up. They're developing a culture, but I think this is why the predictive nature of Amazon adverts has always been a little bit dumb in past.
Yes, totally.
I think it's getting better because when I buy stuff, it is actually quite good at recommendations.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the recommendations. Because you bought this, you should buy this. If you actually scroll down when you're thinking of buying something, there's something down there that says, oh, other people who bought this also bought this, and it is actually decent products, and they give you a discount for buying all three at the same time and stuff like that. So it is getting a bit more advanced.
It'll be fun if they start making real leaps. Like, let's say you're reading something about Brexit, and then you get an ad for a yellow vest or something like that. a few sort of leaps. I know. I thought I'd bring up a little French angle there.
Homes to buy in Spain.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to move on to the last thing, which we said we'd talk about, which is 5G spectrum auctions. So I've just been writing about Canada. They've just auctioned out a bunch of 600 megahertz. There's an interesting story in Japan where it's not so much the auction itself, but alongside that, Japan seems to have made a stronger statement on what that 5G is allowed to be used with respect to sort of Chinese vendors, which is a bit of a tangent. But before I go off on that tangent, I might mention the H word for the first time in this podcast. In the auctions, I wanted to chat this at you, Ray. So we've got people spending a bit of money. The German one's in full flow at the moment. They've reached about 5 billion, which is, I think, about what people thought, but it's not over yet, so it might well go beyond that. Obviously, we know the Italians went mental, spent tons of money. Ian is keeping track of this metric that he uses, which is cost per megahertz per population, which seems like a good way of assessing the overall value. But, we all know, especially the 3G auctions, everyone massively overpaid. Have you got any sense of what the sort of going rate is for 5G spectrum and whether they're going to get a sort of adequate ROI from this spectrum?
No, because, it is different from country to country. Most are following some kind of auction process, but not all. But I'll just repeat what I've been saying for years, is that short-term gain is long-term pain. And I would say that the smart countries are the ones who will set a price for a license and then have very exacting conditions that need to be met,
like coverage,
to get that
sort of thing.
To get the license. A lot of metrics. This is what they tend to do in Scandinavia. And then, because they want that investment to be in the network, in the services, in the coverage that will bring value to the entire market, and not have these companies then having to rethink their economics and their financials once they've actually got hold of a license.
That's right, because
it's just, I think it's common sense, but of course people are greedy.
Was it Denmark or Norway recently finished one round of spectrum, and I saw one of the telcos got an allocation of X amount of megahertz in this band. I can't remember the exact specifics, but they got it complete for free. But with some really hardcore coverage obligations.
Yeah,
and that's a really good way to do it.
It is.
It's a really good way.
Don't
give it away free everywhere.
The impact on GDP, just for example. I know there's a lot of how can you measure the impact on GDP? But if you have greater more efficient communications networks, how is that not going to be a positive for overall productivity in this day and age?
So you're saying that there's too much of a emphasis on the short-term cash grab by the state?
Yes.
And they're not thinking about the long-term benefits to the country?
Yeah. Have they done the analysis of the tax returns from increased productivity by having the Scandinavian model? If they have, maybe they have just... Again, it comes down to lobbying. Certain people will not want that model to happen, and of course others will just go, oh my god, we need that money to build a new road or something like this.
Yeah,
it's very short-termist. I think it's counterproductive.
Yeah, they could just say, let's say we've got 100 megahertz of this spectrum band, we've got 4 operators, you each get 25 each, and this is the cost, and these are the obligations. They don't have to throw it into an auction format at all.
No.
In fact, the only reason to put it into an auction format, presumably, because there will also be regulations on it. They won't let one operator outbid everyone and get all of it. So the only reason to put it into an auction format, presumably, is to maximise the revenue to the state from the process. Well, it seems like the primary reason anyway.
Yeah, it also is not conducive to attracting new entrants.
No, certainly isn't. Yeah, because...
so if you're setting a low price and putting putting quite a lot of metric against that. Companies, new entrants can come in and say, well, we know this will be. They have set costs. It's not an unknown. And if you're a new entrant and you don't know how much a license is going to cost, or you have a certain limit, you know you're going to get up, and that puts pressure then on the incumbents to bid even more. I mean, they know what they're doing. They do, but no, I think I agree with you on that, and obviously operators would agree. I think the German one that's currently underway, and we'll see how it ends up. But they actually didn't want the thing to happen, did they? They were the German operators have got the worst of both worlds. They've got got the
those
auction.
roaming obligations. They're kicking them in the teeth, aren't they?
They've got all of the requirements of a low cost license and have to pay a lot for the license. So yeah,
because I think
double
isn't there
whammy.
one thing where they're allowing the roaming regulations is completely counterintuitive, that they can buy into somewhere, yet a new entrant can buy into a metropolitan, but doesn't have to can give roaming rights there, but then the incumbents are forced to give them roaming rights everywhere else in the country, so they can buy into the most profitable area and not have to worry about deploying a network everywhere around the country. But then the incumbents have been forced into roaming rights.
Well, that's one of the dilemmas of regulation and interfering in markets, full stop, is, you think you fix one thing, but then you create another problem somewhere else. Yeah, and that's an argument, a very simplistic argument for a more sort of laissez-faire approach. But obviously we know with telecoms you do have to have regulation, because there's such a high barrier to entry, because it's a finite resort, because it's a national resource. So you do have to have some regulation. But yeah, the more you regulate, the more you will sometimes create problems for yourselves. So the thing I want to finish off, and we're nearly out of time, but the Japanese one, that seems to have just gone reasonably smoothly. I don't think there's any big headlines about overpaying or imbalance between the major operators there. But they seem to have, and this is something I need to clarify because I've only read one or two accounts of this. They seem to have made a sort of hard commitment on Chinese vendors in their 5G network. So as we've discussed countless times on this pod before, the Americans have been hassling all their allies, of which Japan is one, to basically freeze out all Chinese vendors, which on the whole means Huawei, from 5G networks on grounds of security concerns. And their various allies have made, Australia's come out quite hard sort of last year, going, yep, they're definitely out. People like us, New Zealand, Canada have sort of sat on the fence a little bit more. But it looks like Japan, from what I read, have just come out and gone, yeah, all right, no Chinese vendors in our 5G network, which is going to be an interesting thing, and obviously a win for the US versus China in that particular one. Not least by the fact that they're right next door.
If a decision has been made as a result of US pressure, maybe it hasn't though.
Well, I mean, certainly no. I mean, it was hard. It's impossible to know precisely why they've made the decision, but we can certainly look at the coincidence of US pressure and that decision being made, and that decision not being made by people who aren't considered to be US allies. I'm not aware of any, African countries or whatever, where there isn't a really close diplomatic tie that are making those sorts of decisions. On the flip side, one thing I'll point out, something I wrote up yesterday, an American diplomat or politician or whatever has come out and suddenly said that they really approve of Germany's approach to 5G security. Now, this is noteworthy because they'd previously given them a really hard time and threatened to sort of withdraw cooperation over spying or whatever, intelligence. And then Germany had just sort of went, whatever German for up yours is. If only we had a German speaker in here. And basically told them to back off. And now the Americans are coming out with this more conciliatory tone. But when I was writing it up, underneath this conciliatory tone, they're basically saying, yes, we really approve of the German way, and we think the rest of Europe should follow it. Yeah, they've really nailed it. They're spot on. So long as their approach to 5G security results in Huawei not being allowed in the network anyway. So they're kind of saying the same thing, but in terms of diplomatic language, they've adopted a softer tone, which I suppose is fair enough. So anyway, okay, Pierre keeps looking at his watch. So I'll wrap it up there. I nearly made it all the way through the podcast without saying Huawei, but 99%. Okay, thanks a lot for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.